Sweet.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Beaver Tales webinar. We're really pleased to be here, and thank you so much to everyone who's joined us. And particularly thank you to anyone who's already donated to our Wild Beaver Appeal. And we hope that tonight will be a really informing evening for you to hear all about that project, and at the end get to ask questions. I'd like to introduce my two colleagues, Cheryl and Laura. Cheryl is our Director of Nature and People, and she's been working on getting us to this position to release beavers into the wild in Cornwall for over a decade. So it's been a long old journey for Cheryl. And Cheryl's going to talk to us about this stuffed beaver here called Cadman, and she's going to be demonstrating a catchment approach. And this is Laura Snell. She's our conservation officer. She's going to be telling us all about the wild beavers at Helmond Tor Nature Reserve and what benefits they've brought to wildlife there. Cheryl's then going to give us an update on our Wild Beaver licence and how that's all going, and a little bit about the Beaver Appeal. And then at the end, we're going to have a chance for you to ask questions. So please do put those questions in the chat, and I'll be monitoring them and making sure that we try to get around everyone and answer everything. And if we don't for any reason, then you'll have the opportunity to email us in and ask any questions. The webinar is going to be recorded, so we'll be sending around a link once we've got that sorted for you to rewatch if you'd like, or share with other people. So first of all, Cheryl is going to talk to us about Cadman. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Tom. Evening, everybody. Just going to move the camera. Apologies for any shaky camera work. That's not what we're qualified to do. So thanks, Laura. And Tom's going to put the picture up on our screen so I can see what you can see. Okay, great. All right, so this is Cadman. And the important thing is this is a kit. This is a beaver kit. She was about a year old. Sadly, she died. She was one of the kits from the fenced enclosure at Woodland Valley Farm in Laddock that I'm sure many of you have been to. If I had an adult one here, we're talking large spaniel sort of size. So they're 1 metre from nose to tail tip. The Cadman is a lot easier to handle. But yeah, don't be fooled into thinking this is how big they are, because she's a kit. So this is the Eurasian beaver, and there are 2 species. There's a North American species as well, and these animals are native to Britain. And we've got archaeological evidence from North Cornwall, the Rumps near Polzeath, where back in the 60s, some beaver skull bones were found and were verified by the Natural History Museum. So we've definitely got evidence of them being here in Cornwall. But we lost them several hundred years ago, and we lost them as a species from Britain completely. Thankfully, they survived in a few pockets on the continent, and they've been spreading back. And now 27 countries have had beavers back in a big way. So it's a real species success story. The reason they went extinct, by the way, is that they were pretty good to eat because they're big animals and quite easy to find. The fur was very usable, and it could be felted and make waterproof hats out of it. And also they're a territorial as a family unit, and they mark their territory with a substance that they excrete from their rear end called castoreum. And that was a useful substance. It was used as a vanilla flavouring and also as a pain relief. So back in medieval times, people would get these castor glands and dry them and then sell them as pain relief. And that's because their habit of eating willow and willow bark, which has a lot of salicylic acid in it, and that, of course, is what aspirin is derived from. So they were very useful to us. So we made them go extinct, sadly, but now they're on the way back. So we'll do a bit of close-up work on Cadman to tell you a bit more about the adaptations for semi-aquatic living. So first of all, the fur then, and you might be able to see, apologies I'm sorry if you're watching this on the phone, but I'll tell you what I'm showing. There's these longer hairs which are the guard hairs, and then beneath that a really downy, dense fur, which is barbed, so it all sort of ties together, and that traps a layer of air, and that's what keeps them warm and dry. Moving on to the very characteristic tail, the sort of leathery tail. They're multifunctional, the tails. They store fat in those, so it's a good way if we can get camera trap footage of beavers to check that they're nice and healthy. They'll also use them for propulsion if they need to swim quickly because they're scared of something. They use them for steering as well when they're in the water, and also when they're on their hind legs on land, reaching up to grab a branch, they can use the tail as an extra support. So they are funny looking creatures, no doubt about that. Very dexterous little front paws here. They don't have an opposable thumb, they'll use their little finger to grip sticks. Like this has got an example here, which has been, all the bark's been chewed off. They are herbivores, and so they're using their hands there to grab grasses and herbs, and then in the winter they're much more reliant on tree bark. So little front paws there, and then these big webbed back feet, and all the power for swimming is in the back legs. So they're also using their paws to dig the tunnels. So that they have these underwater entrances to their lodges, so that they feel nice and safe. They don't know that there aren't bears and wolves around anymore. So, and that's of course why they build dams, so that they can have these underwater entrances, and they need a good depth of water for those, so that they can be nice and safe from predators that don't even exist anymore. All right, nice close-up of her face here. These are nocturnal animals. Their eyes are quite small, a bit like a badger, so they're not really using their eyes that much more reliant on their sense of smell and their hearing. But you can see how all the sense organs, are in line, so that when they're swimming, there we go. When they're swimming, the water level will be there, and they can still smell and hear, even when they're swimming along. You just see the top bit of them, a bit like an iceberg, where most of the bulk is underwater when they're swimming. Last thing to tell you about is their teeth. You can't see much on Cadman here, but I've got a real beaver tooth there. So most of that would be in the skull, like that, and then they just keep growing, just like all rodents. And that orange colour is an iron compound, which makes the front surface much tougher than the back. And you can see how the back surface is worn away more quickly, and you've got this chisel shape. So really important tool for them. If they get damaged teeth, that can be the end of them. So really, really well adapted to the semi-aquatic life. I'm now going to hold on to your hats because the camera's going back to Laura. Okay, well, where am I? Hope it's still all there, and I'm dizzy. Next thing I'm going to show, this is quite Blue Peter, all this, but is what beavers do, the impact of the beaver dams at the catchment scale. So we've got this model to try and demonstrate this, complete with a Playmobil beaver that is as big as a car, but let's not worry about that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, we've got two streams here. There's one stream without any beaver dams on it, and then another stream here where this is what I get paid for. I was building beaver dams out of plasticine this morning. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to make it rain, and we're going to see what happens to that rain, and then we're going to bring in a bit of soil pollution as well to see what happens then. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, so I'm going to squirt some water on here now to see what happens. Probably a bit noisy, so I won't put this any time. Gosh, spray a bit low. Okay. Can you see that a spray bit of water up here, and it's very quickly draining down into the sea here. And this is not dissimilar to rivers in Cornwall, where with steep valley sides. So our river catchments are known as quite flashy catchments or rapid response catchments. And what that means is, because of the steep sides, once rain has fallen, it very quickly makes its way into the streams, and then we can get this rapid rise of water level. And that's what makes communities downstream vulnerable to flooding. So I'll do the same now and make it rain and the beaver downstream. Bear with me. Right, so the beaver dams are leaky. They're not a complete block. It's just like when you were a kid and you might have built a dam in a stream out of stones and sticks. The water still drains through, but much more slowly. So the water's just about coming through here now. But we've got little pools formed behind the dams, and that's exactly what happens where beavers build dams on small streams. It's worth pointing out they are only building these dams on the smaller feeder streams, not the main rivers. Once you get over 3 or 4 meters wide, then it's too much for them to dam. So we're just thinking about all those little streams higher up in the river catchments. So this can help a bit. We know that the peak flow is reduced after heavy rainfall where we've got beaver dams, and we've had scientists measuring this, and that peak, the flood peak, which is the one that can cause issues for people living downstream, can be reduced by 30 to 50%. So for communities that suffer from flooding, having lots of beavers back in the catchment is going to be helpful. I'll just quickly then show you what happens when we put some soil pollution in the mix. Actually, before that, I should talk about drought as well, because these pools that form behind the dam, that water sinks into the ground. We get wetlands created here, which are acting as like big sponges, and then they'll just gradually let the water out. So in high flow, beaver dams are useful, and low flow, drought conditions, beaver dams can be really useful. So both extremes of climate in our river systems, beavers could help us with. So it's all part of why we're interested in getting these animals back. Right, I'm now going to add some soil pollution to the catchments. This is cocoa powder. Probably make us a bit hungry in the room here. Okay, let's see what happens a bit more over there. How's that look? Okay, do the same thing and make it rain. And just making a massive mess, really. There we go. So no surprises then that we've had a big plume of pollution going down into the sea. And this is, you'll have seen this yourselves when you're driving around Cornwall after heavy rain, and you notice the streams, some of them running brown with soil, and those soil particles are taking nitrates and phosphates with them, and adding all these nutrients into the river systems and then into the sea. This can impact the seagrass beds, cause algal blooms and all sorts of problems for our wildlife. But let's try it on the beaver dammed stream house. Good, good. A few, says Cheryl. Okay. Hopefully that's relatively clear. Now, behind the beaver dam here, we've got a pool, and the soil has settled out. The same behind this dam here. So we've only got a small amount that's making its way into the sea. So a much smaller plume of pollution, and this actually happens in beaver ponds. And we've had this measured. Some of the scientists at Exeter University that have been measuring this were surprised themselves how much of an effect it had. And below a system of beaver pools, some of the nitrate was not even detectable on their instruments in some of the experiments they were doing. So this really happens, and this is because the flow of the water is slowed down. The energy, there's less energy in the water, so it can't carry the soil particles, and they settle down onto the bottom of the pond. So the water flowing out from a series of beaver ponds is cleaner than the water going in. There's also been some research more recently on bacterial load of streams, and it's having the same effect. That was all I was going to say about the catchment.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Cheryl. So, Laura, if you can move the camera back to where it was, and we're now going to hear from Laura.
I'll get that with me. I'll just tidy up a minute.
So Laura is now going to talk to us about the beavers which were released at Helmentor back in February 2024, and a little bit about the story about how that all unfolded. So let me just share that screen again. Okay, go Laura.
So hi everyone, yeah. So back in 2024, we had a member of the public get in touch with us because they had seen feeding signs of beavers at Helmentor. So we promptly got out there and did some field survey and found signs of beavers at the reserve, and we've been monitoring them closely ever since. So I'm just going to delve into what the beavers have been doing over the past year, and the benefits they've already been providing for wildlife. So when the beavers first arrived, it took them a while to find their spot where they wanted to be. And when we were out tracking them, we discovered signs across 4 kilometres of watercourse across the whole reserve. So they'd been exploring quite far and wide. And it did take them a while to find where they wanted to be, but eventually they found their spot, they built a dam, and that's when the magic started to happen. And as you can see in this before and after footage, this is drone footage, the area of standing water and the wetland that they've created in just a year is pretty significant. So here we have the dam. It's a significant dam, and it's the only dam that we have on the site, but it's holding back a lot of water, lots of sticks, various sizes, lots of mud packed in there and leaves. And you can really see the difference in the water levels on the dam. Here we have a beaver doing some dam maintenance. They check it regularly. This is what we call dam cam. And they're constantly patrolling, doing reinforcements. And this dam actually breached in the winter, completely breached, and they rebuilt it within about 2 weeks. So here we have the wetland upstream in an area of beech and willow woodland, and the beavers, you can see the water, the standing water that's there now. The beavers have been really creating a lot of structure, felling trees, coppicing willow, opening up the canopy so that other vegetation can come in. And they've really have created an ideal habitat for themselves. So here we have one of the beavers doing some nibbling on willow. This is a great piece of footage. It shows just how efficient they are at taking down branches. And they'll nibble the branch, take it down, and they'll use it for food, but also as construction materials for their dams and their lodges. So if you watch this, the beaver really quickly takes this branch down with its sharp teeth that Cheryl showed you an example of earlier. And the beavers, they don't necessarily kill a tree. So willow especially, we get regrowth of willow, which we'll show you a picture of in a minute after this beaver's finished. There it goes, off to do something with this twig, branch, have a nibble, use the branches in the dam or the lodge. So here is an example of a tree that's been nibbled by beavers, and you can see on the left there's the start of some regrowth. It's a willow. And then if we move on, Tom, so this is that same tree about 6 months later. You can see all the regrowth, lush new regrowth that's occurred in a short amount of time, and that the tree hasn't died. So this is beavers coppicing willow, and this creates a really nice dense understory, rejuvenates the understory, and can provide nice habitat for other creatures, birds. Yeah, moving on. So this is the beaver actually chewing that tree, having a good old gnaw. This was a willow and it did resprout. Some trees, they will die. We've got beech in this woodland, and the beech haven't been doing as well as the willow, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, as deadwood's really important in a woodland, really helps to enrich biodiversity in a woodland. Deadwood, fungi will grow on deadwood. A lot of invertebrates complete their life cycles in deadwood. Cavities in deadwood that develop can be used by birds and bats. So having a proportion of deadwood in a woodland can be a really good thing. And many of our woodlands are actually lacking sufficient deadwood resource. This is just another example of how vegetation has responded to the beaver presence. So this is a species called royal fern, very much a wet woodland species, found in the southwest. It used to be collected in Victorian times, so it did suffer declines historically, but we do get a lot of this in Cornwall. But this is a species that we've really noticed just in the year that the beavers have decided to make a wetland here. It's really flourished in this environment, and the beavers have also been foraging on this. So just an example of how vegetation is responding and changing to the presence of beavers. Here we have a rhododendron. So rhododendrons are a non-native invasive species. We don't particularly like seeing it across our reserve. So it doesn't like getting its feet wet, and here the beavers, the raised water levels are causing it to die off. So the beavers are helping with a bit of invasive species control here. And similarly with gorse doesn't like getting its feet wet, and across Helmond-Tor we do have to do a lot of scrub control, trying to control scrub, which can take over at the expense of some of our nicer habitats. So locally the beavers are pushing back the gorse. And also the bracken, we've got some dense stands of bracken along this area of the river corridor. Again, it doesn't like getting its feet wet, so you can see it started to die back, and then that gives opportunity for other vegetation to start flourishing. And there's an example of where the canopy's been opened up and we've noticed some aquatic vegetation starting to appear. So another thing that the beavers have been doing is creating channels around the wetland. So they will dig out channels and it extends their range across the wetland, enabling them to get to more foraging habitat. They'll dig them out, create mud piles with debris and the sediment. So we just saw a beaver travelling along one of the channels that it's created. And this is also, we're in an area of quite dense rush here. So this is really also opening up the rush habitat, creating more niches, pools that other animals can then exploit. So here we have one of the channels and you can see it's in quite dense rush. And this is what the rush looks like normally, really quite dense and thick. And then we've got these little pools developing amongst the rush habitat. Here's a beaver grabbing some leaves, debris and twigs and pushing it up after creating channels, pushing it up onto the side of the bank. Very busy. And there are some of the mud piles as well. So all signs of beaver activity. And now just moving on to some of the other wildlife we've been seeing in the wetland. And here we've got a moorhen mum and her chicks using one of the beaver channels foraging. These channels are creating foraging habitat for the birds, lots of cover. We've really noticed an uplift in birds across the wetland area. We've had heron, lots of ducks, we've had water rail, which is a very secretive bird. Here are the ducks, lovely little duck family that I keep capturing on trail cam, really having a lovely time in the wetland. And there's a really great piece of research recently that came out that identified that birds within 100 metres of a beaver wetland, species abundance and richness, there's an uplift and can be an uplift within 100 metres of a wetland. So it just goes to show the reach of a beaver wetland and how it can impact on birds in a positive way. Here we've got some lovely little ducklings. I think there was a nest nearby. Again, having a lovely time on the beaver channels that have been created. This is the one coming down from the right here, showing its siblings. There we go. They're splashing in. And also, we've also noticed that the mud piles I was talking about earlier, birds really love foraging in these mud piles, and it must be because there's lots of grubs and larvae, and we've seen birds a lot doing this behaviour, and also gathering nesting material from these mud piles. So the beavers are creating these little micro niches that are being exploited by other creatures. We've also seen an increase in the number of dragonflies and damselflies using the wetland area. So we've seen dragonflies and damselflies egg laying. One of our special species at Helmond Tor is the small red damselfly, a species that really likes historic mining sites. And Helmond Tor, our Helmond Tor Reserve Complex, was historically tin streamed. It's a nationally scarce species. And we're hoping that the beavers, through their wetland creation, will enhance and mean that this species can spread further across the reserve. One thing I did also forget to mention earlier about birds is we have a special species, the willow tit is at Helmond Tor Nature Reserve. And this is, I think it's our fastest declining breeding bird. It's really suffered. We do have it at Helmond Tor. It likes wet woodland, it likes the dense willow, and it feeds upon insects that are associated with wetland habitats. So we're really hoping that the beavers, we can tell a positive story in terms of beavers and willow tits. The Cornwall Mammal Group have been doing some small mammal monitoring around the beaver wetland, and as well as finding lots of mammal evidence, they've also captured grass snake, and this is an example. And again, another species that likes wetlands and will benefit from the presence of beavers. We've also caught deer using the wetland. Now, this footage was in a particularly hot period, so it really goes to show that these beaver wetlands can be an oasis for wildlife when it gets really hot and in times of drought. And here we've got a mum roe deer and her fawn. This is a spot the stoat piece of footage. So in a minute from the right, you'll see a stoat coming in and hunting in the beaver wetland, climbing through the trees. There it goes. It's got some birds coming and telling it off, but another mammal utilising the wetland. Fleeting glimpse, but we've caught them a few times on trail cam. And finally, another semi-aquatic mammal, otters have been using the beaver wetland. So we've caught otters on quite a few occasions, taking advantage of the increased amount of water and foraging habitat. Now, finally, with all the benefits that beavers can bring, they have presented us with some challenges. So this is our Wilderness Trail marker post, a before shot just after we'd found the dam. And this is the marker post a couple of weeks later. So there was a significant rise in water levels, which flooded our wilderness trail footpath, which is one of the main trails through the reserve. Now we had to put in some new infrastructure, a new bridge and a new boardwalk that you can see here, which gives access through the wetland. But it's just a nice, it goes to show we as landowners have been faced with challenges, and it leads us on to talking about the wild release licence that we've been working on, because a huge part of that is working with landowners, providing support to landowners to transition to living alongside beavers. So back over to Cheryl.
Thanks, Laura. Brilliant. Yeah, so just an update on where we are with the licence application. So we need a government licence in order to release beavers into the wild. That didn't happen for the animals that we've just been seeing impacts of. They were released by a third party last year illegally. It's exciting to see what they're doing, but we don't condone the way that was done with beavers being released in that way. So what we've been working towards for nearly 2 years now is getting a government licence for wild release. So government opened the process after years and years of us waiting. They opened the process in February this year, and the first stage was an expression of interest. So because we've been working on this so long, because we've had Lauren Jasper, our beaver officer, in post, funded by St Evil, the candle company, brilliantly, that allowed us to get the head start. So we put our expression of interest in quite quickly. We heard back from Natural England to say we've been successful with that, and we were then invited to submit a full application. So we did that shortly afterwards, and we got that in June. So we're now in the period where we're waiting to hear back, and we expect it would probably be mid-October, and that would be 4 months from when we submitted. So we're waiting with everything crossed that we get that permission to release several pairs of beavers over a couple of years into the Par and Foy catchments. There we go, thanks now for the front. Yes, so this would be a 10-year project. It'll be more than that really, but the licence period is for 10 years. And what we're after is to get a self-sustaining population, a genetically healthy population to repopulate Cornwall. We've tested and trialled with the enclosures in Cornwall for 8 years now. So this is now the opportunity to go big and get these animals back in a big way. That doesn't come cheap, of course. We have to commit to Natural England that we will run the beaver management plan. So this is supporting anybody who has issues with beavers. Basically, keep an eye on what they're doing, where they're going. If there's any negative impacts, we have to be ready to support the landowners or communities, whoever it is. And we have to commit to that for 10 years. That's why we have a big fundraising target. The public appeal part of this is 50 grand, £50,000. But the whole project over 10 years, because just a member of staff, a bit of extra money for monitoring, equipment, getting the beavers themselves. Before you know it, over 10 years, this is adding up to like £800,000. So it's quite an undertaking for us. And it's quite a bold and ambitious project. But we know that nature is doing that. And we know that so many of our species are going down. We can't keep doing the same stuff and expect a different result. So this is about Cornwall Wildlife Trust really stepping up to the plate and going big.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we go into questions?
I'm sure if there's anything we've missed,
yeah,
people will ask us questions, so it'd be great if we could save time for that.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we've already had quite a few questions coming in, so thank you so much for those. If anyone has missed the comment I put in the chat, if you have a question, no question is too silly. please put anything in there. We will not laugh at any questions at all. So Cheryl's not promising. But seriously, if you have any questions, please do put them into the chat and I will be reading them out. We've got a few in there already. So I'm going to launch with the first question we had earlier on in the evening. Someone was saying they recently saw the Facebook post of the dead beaver on a local beach. It's something we've been talking about here in the office a lot over the week. And they've said it was thought to have swum down the stream and died due to the salt water. Is that a risk to beavers that are released? And if so, how common is this occurrence? Cheryl and Laura, just before you answer that question, for anyone who hasn't heard of that news story, if you could just give a brief summary of what's happened and then talk about whether it's a risk. Thank you.
Yeah, so at the weekend, we were alerted to a dead beaver at Polzeath Beach, which is part of the Camel catchment. It was in a very odd position, but it went off for a post-mortem, and it did die due to saltwater intoxication. And beavers do not cope well in saltwater. They're not adapted biologically to living in saltwater, but often you get juveniles dispersing or young dispersing, and they will make their way down through estuaries and out into the sea. And yeah, there's a risk of them perishing as a result. So there is a risk with wild release, you know, as beaver populations expand, that we actually start seeing this more. But yeah, it's a risk. But there's plenty of habitat in Cornwall for them to, you know, thrive in beyond estuaries and coastal habitats.
Yeah, it's a natural hazard, and unfortunately it is going to happen.
And the question is about how common that would be.
It's hard to say because we've got experience from most of the experience of wild beavers that we're learning from is Devon and places like Kent, and this does happen. But both of those counties aren't full of beavers yet, so we can so there's a handful. This happens to a handful of animals with the population at its current levels. So we'll see as time goes on, but we wouldn't expect it to be a huge problem for them. It's sad on an individual animal front, but as a species, we're not worried about that.
Janet, thank you for that question. Moving on, we will go to Gemma, who's asked, is the licence for Cornwall only or is it nationwide? Oh gosh, great question. It's actually only for the River Par and River Foy catchments. It's been great to have gone to the whole of Cornwall, but because we then have to monitor what the animals are doing and support landowners, we didn't want to go too big and bite off more than we could chew, if that's they're not the wrong thing to say when the beavers are around. So we've restricted it to those catchments. But I can tell you, I was in a meeting today about people thinking, well, what's next? Even though we haven't raised all the money for this, we haven't got the licence, there's already beavery people talking about what's next. This will be individual licences for river catchments. I think Natural England would probably be interested and would certainly review larger applications, but then we'd need more staffing and over 10 years, so it just gets a bit difficult to handle. Thank you, Gemma, for that question. Olwen has asked about hearing recently that one problem of illegal releases is bringing beavers from the continent that have tapeworm. Will the beavers we release be checked before that happens?
Yes, yeah, that's part of the licence, that they'll have a health screening before any release can happen. So, yeah.
And then one comment rather than a question which I wanted to address. Someone has said that they've not been able to see any of the pictures that we've been sharing. We really apologise for that. Not quite sure what's caused that, but I hope that others have been able to see, and to confirm that we will make a recording available of this. So if you have had issues with seeing the pictures, then watch out for the emails that will come round, and you'll be able to then view it with all the pictures. Next question is, Cornwall Wildlife Trust has likely just applied to release, oh, sorry, that was a response to the previous question. Julian, thank you for your question, a great one. What volunteering opportunities are there to help beyond donating? And we're pleased to say there will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Once we get these animals out, we'll need more eyes and ears on the ground to keep an eye on them. So we'll need volunteers we'll be setting up and training up a volunteer team to monitor for where are the beavers, what are they doing, and as time goes on, it'd be great if we could have volunteers in the communities who know a bit about beavers and how to manage some of the easier issues that beavers might throw up, so that they can give advice locally. And this is how it works in other countries. Like in Germany, there's a lot of community volunteers who get involved. So there's so many benefits we can get from having these animals back. As a society, a huge number of benefits. The beavers are going to do things where we don't want them to, but if we can get help from volunteers in the community to deal with those, then we can all enjoy the benefits. So yes, please, if you're interested, we'd love to hear from you, Julian.
Thank you, Julian. Paul has asked about whether beavers normally eat bracken, because that's something they've observed on the Loch of Lewis in Scotland. Apologies if I've mispronounced that.
I mean, that'd be amazing if they do eat bracken. We haven't seen it at Helmond Tor yet, but they have got an abundance of food at the Helmond Tor Nature Reserve, so maybe it's not top of their list, but that would be great if they started munching on bracken.
It wouldn't surprise me because they're eating other ferns.
Yeah, they're eating the royal fern, so.
We're learning all the time as well, and the list of plant species that we know beavers eat is just growing and growing and growing. They'll eat Himalayan balsam.
Japanese knotweed.
Japanese knotweed.
Janet has asked if we could say a little bit more about the work we've been doing with landowners and what the response has been to that in the area.
Great. So yeah, we've got a beaver officer whose role, Lauren Jasper, whose role it has been gathering information for the licence application and putting it together. And part of that's been stakeholder engagement. So we've held workshops, four workshops in different areas of the Par and Foy, and we've engaged locally with landowners, all sorts of stakeholders, one-on-one meetings as well, going to visit people who've got concerns, and it's been a huge part of this project, the people side, and talking to people about what not only the benefits but the challenges that beavers might bring, and how we will be able to support them.
Yeah, and the response has been on the majority of people have been very positive.
Yeah.
Some people thought we'd already put them back already because we've been talking about beavers so much for so long. There's still some landowners concerned, and that's completely understandable. It's a big change. We're used to being the species that builds things and excavates things. So to have a rodent come and start doing that can be a bit unnerving for people. So we're in the difficult 10-year period of everybody getting used to having these animals around and learning to live alongside them. But I'd say the response has been pretty good. It helps that in Cornwall, our river valleys being so steep. All we need to do is give beavers that ribbon of land at the bottom of a valley to do their thing, and we can get all those benefits. It's just we don't have many flat, low-lying areas. And at the Helmond Tor, where they built the dam, it is quite a flat area, so we've got quite a big pool. But that's really it's quite unusual in Cornwall. Most of the time, it's going to be be dams along a stream, and then they'll be able to farm just normally either side. So the conflict level for Cornwall will be a lot lower than other parts of the country.
I think it's also worth mentioning that the engagement with landowners is going to be ongoing throughout the 10-year period. So it's not just stopping with the licence application. We do expect more people to be getting in touch with us as beavers spread and move around that perhaps aren't concerned now but might be in the future. So it's very much an ongoing process.
Great, thank you for that question, Janet. And now Helen has asked a question about, really good question, where are we getting the beavers that we're releasing from, and have we got a breeding programme?
Interesting question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so in the past, beavers have been brought in from the continent, but as we heard already, that's not been happening in recent years because of the tapeworm that we don't have yet in this country, which can cause problems for human health. So this will be UK sourced beavers. There'll be two options. The Beaver Trust are going to be helping us to source the animals. Some of them will be coming from enclosures around England where there's been youngsters born and they need to be moved on. Some may come from Scotland because there are parts of Scotland where they are trapping the animals, where they're getting up to mischief and moving them on. We'd rather people learn to live alongside the beavers, but where that's not possible, and in Scotland there's been quite a bit of trapping and translocating. So we don't know exactly, but it'll be probably a combination of trapped animals from Scotland and youngsters that have been born into enclosures.
Okay, and now Isla has asked about asking for reassurance, really, that landowners won't be permitted to use lethal control measures when/if problems occur with living alongside them. Yeah,
great question. Natural England has put in place, but to start with, the animals are protected. They're a European protected species, and there's really pragmatic and sensible licensing arrangements. So top of the list is a hierarchy. We call it the management hierarchy. So top of the list is we would go and talk to landowners because they might be worrying about something that isn't a genuine risk. So first it's chat to them. Are their risks well founded, or do we need to just give them more information? Next is can they live along, just let the beavers stay, make space for the beavers? And there's incentives out there. There's some of the agri-environment schemes now, you can get quite good payments for just easing back and cultivating further back from the river, and you can get payments then. So incentivise landowners for giving beavers that bit of space. So that's something we'll be encouraging. Then down the list, Laura will step in if I forget which way around it. You can do some management techniques without needing a licence. So if a dam has been built just in the last 2 weeks, people can remove that dam without needing a licence. So it's really, we're keen to tell landowners about this hierarchy and all the steps that they can take, because nobody who has a genuine problem with beavers doing the wrong thing in the wrong place has to put up with it. So then you get further down in the hierarchy, and if you want to remove a dam that's well established, you do have to do that under licence, because otherwise you risk taking a dam out where there's a lodge and kit. So for animal welfare reasons, for the things that need more intervention, it'd be people like us that have been trained and have the licence. Translocation comes next. And then lethal control is right at the bottom, and no one's really talking much about that yet because that's a last resort. And this is where Natural England is trying to set things up a bit differently to Scotland. In Scotland, translocation happened a bit too quickly, and sometimes lethal control happened a bit too quickly because they didn't have this long lead in like we've had to get all of this hierarchy sorted out. So there's a bit of knee-jerk reaction going on. So we've learnt from what's happened in Scotland, and it's all quite clear how this should operate. So that's an absolute last resort. I can't imagine what circumstances that would be allowed for decades.
The next question is related to that, and we've covered bits of it already, but someone has asked, there are obvious benefits. What sort of challenges might local communities or landowners who are opposed to the idea be facing that we haven't already mentioned?
So there's the localised flooding, like what we experienced with our footpath. A local landowner could experience flooding that they're not happy with on an area of pasture or something like that. People might be concerned about trees being felled, ornamental trees. Some trees, have special meaning for people. So there's that concern. impacts on infrastructure, roads, burrowing into banks. These are all issues that landowners might be facing with beavers and might be concerned about.
Good thing is that because so many other countries have had them back, and in North America as well, the population there is coming back in a big way. So there's a huge amount of experience of how we can manage these impacts, including things like float devices or beaver deceivers, where you can put a big plastic tube through a dam and you guard it at each end, and it acts as an overflow. So we can have control over the water level and reduce it to a level that a landowner is happy with. And the beavers don't really understand what's going on, and they just carry on as normal. So there are tried and tested techniques out there now. So we wouldn't expect, beavers aren't going to do anything different here, touch wood. That they're doing already in other countries, and the management is really well practiced, and it's normal practice there now. This is as I said before, this 10-year period for us, we've got a lot to learn and get used to, but then it'll be normal. And we'll look back in 10, 20, 30 years and wonder what we were worried about.
I love this next question, which is someone's commented that they found the presentation really fascinating, and that they can see Cornwall Wildlife Trust has got a real interest in this work. What about other wildlife trusts? What are they doing with regards to beavers? Yes,
so well, Devon Wildlife has been involved from very early on, because and have been really instrumental because of the wild beavers on the River Otter. That rather than the government when they were discovered, those 5 animals, rather than DEFRA come and trap them and take them away, because this was way before we were all so excited about bringing beavers back, Devon Wildlife Trust took that on as a research project. And the management hierarchy that I was talking about earlier, a lot of that has come from the work that Devon have done. So Devon, a huge amount. Kent have been doing quite a lot. In fact, it was Kent Wildlife Trust that first brought beavers into the UK, but they were quite quiet about it at that time. It was in Hand Fen, one of their sites of special scientific interest, which the beavers manage for them now. The Scottish Wildlife Trust, of course, involved up in Knapdale. And there's various other trusts now that are hoping to get wild release licences. I know Hampshire and Isle of Wight are quite far forward. Yeah, Cheshire have got enclosures now. Some are going for wild release.
Yeah, I think several trusts have submitted expressions of interest to Natural England, so they will be being assessed to see if they'll go forward for a licence application.
We are one of the first that's going for a licence application.
Right, still got lots of questions, and we've got 8 minutes left, so we're going to do our best to get through them all. What's the effect of beavers on aquatic life, including invertebrates and fish?
So yeah, aquatic invertebrates go through the roof, and of course they're then fish food, because they're diversifying the habitats out of the water. They're also doing the same inside. You get lots more nooks and crannies and places for things to hide. The slowing the flow and means you get lots of algal growth, which is then food for everything else. So pretty much everything does better when beavers are around. There is still concern about migratory fish amongst some people, worrying that the beaver dams will stop the movement. We think on balance, because of the benefits to water quality and moderating high flows and drought conditions, that fish will do well. But there's understandable concern because salmon populations are crashing anyway. So there's concern from some that beavers could silt up spawning grounds and things. So yeah, we're having lots of discussions with fisheries. Yeah.
Okay, next question from Sarah. In the absence of any natural predator, can you ever imagine that beavers would be a problem in the way that deer are?
They'll run out of space. So some work has been looking at the birth rates amongst beavers populations. When the population builds and the territories get full, really fascinatingly, the birth rate starts to drop off. So there will be some natural self-limiting, which makes sense because there's no point of a female having 4 kits. They're having 2 to 4 kits a year, usually 2, 3. There's no point of female having 4 kits if there's no territories for them to spread into. So we expect some moderation, and the kits will get taken by some things.
Yeah, otters might take a beaver kit if the opportunity arose. So we have heard of that. And there's quite a lot of mortality in juveniles in general. So yeah, otters are probably the main one, or dogs. You know, you don't know when they come into conflict with humans. Dogs, roads,
when there are floods, that can impact them. So they're up against it really, and it's the youngsters that are most vulnerable because when they're 2 years old, that's when they leave their natal territory to try and find their own spot. So at that point, as the population builds and the territories get full, the youngsters will be coming back down to the river to try and find their own territory and be coming up against other families, and that's when they're very vulnerable because beavers will fight each other to the death to defend their territory. So the youngsters, I can't remember what the average is of how many survive. It's like 1 point something.
Yeah, they can be quite vulnerable. When they're dispersing.
And how are we going to ensure gene diversity, particularly initially with a limited gene pool?
Yeah, that's a good question. We know that the diversity there's been work looking at the genetic diversity of the current population in Britain, and it's pretty good. Because some of them have come from Norway, some from Bavaria, and the Bavarian population was sourced from various other extant populations. So the genetic diversity we've got is thought to be reasonably good. The reason that we're putting in an application for multiple pairs is to try and keep the diversity that we get in to the par and foy. To maintain that, we will need multiple animals. So it's multiple pairs in year 1, multiple pairs quite close to them in year 2, so that the ones we put in all mix. And what we're hoping is over time that they'll begin to join up with the ones that are on the Tamar, so we get that mixing as well.
Yeah, so there's a population of wild beavers living on the Tamar, and they are on the tributaries in the headwaters. And the connection between those tributaries and the headwaters of the Foy is across about a mile of wetland up on the moor. So at some point, we expect the Tamar beavers to start moving over potentially to the Foy, and if we've got a population already in the Par and the Foy, then that's when we can enhance the genetic diversity.
I think we've probably only got, there are still a number of questions, probably only got time for one, but please do, as we've said, please feel free to write into us. One more question is, if the application is successful, when do we expect to start those releasing?
Yes, so if we do hear in mid-October,
soon after
that does give us time to get them in this year, providing Beaver Trust can source some individuals, which they're warmed up to do that. So at the earliest it would be October, November.
Yeah, and we want to be doing it really over the winter period when they're not breeding and vulnerable, so it's a less sensitive time, so we would ideally want to be doing it autumn, winter.
And this is if also because we're having to raise the money for it, so we've got to be confident that we can fund the whole thing as well.
Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us this evening for absolutely brilliant engagement and for the lots of positive comments that you're putting in the chat. Now, we really, really appreciate that. We'll be sending an email out this evening around 8 p.m, which gives you an opportunity to provide feedback on this webinar. And if you have further questions, please reply directly to that email so that it can be picked up by the team and we can pass those questions to Cheryl and Laura. And thank you, as we said at the start, for your support already for this appeal. We've had such a wave of generosity from members of the public, so we're really grateful, and you are making this incredible project possible. And please do share it far and wide. Go and tell people all the positive things that beavers do. Thanks ever so much for joining us and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.